The race is on, and George Russell heads into the Australian Grand Prix as World Championship favourite. But are he and Mercedes really up to the challenge? And will it be Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc or someone else who emerges as his main rival? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me for the first episode of our two-part 2026 season preview are Glenn Freeman and Ben Anderson. Right, Glenn, when we rank the teams after testing, we had the top four, still the big four, in reverse order: Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes. So that means George Russell is championship favourite. Probably as far as we're concerned. The bookmakers certainly have him as favourite. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. What I'm pleased about from what we've seen at testing is that I don't think this is going to be another 2014 situation. Yes, Mercedes are the favourite. Yes, there's been an engine regulations change. But I think if Mercedes and Russell win this championship, it's not going to be done in the style of the early hybrid years. So I think we're going to be in for an interesting championship. I don't think we're going to have a walkover, but yeah, I can see why people are saying Russell's favourite.
You like being contrarian, Ben? That would make for good listening.
Who you got?
Be contrarian.
What gave you that idea? Well, there's a chance, isn't there, for Charles Leclerc, maybe, with this Ferrari being
certainly off the line.
Yeah, exactly. But if that car's so good off the line and they can't overtake because they haven't got enough energy, then there's a good chance that he could qualify behind George Russell for almost every race, even when the sandbags come off, but yet get ahead into turn one and then just sort of manage his way to victory. So to be contrarian, let's just say it's Charles Leclerc's year.
Excellent. Thank you for playing your part. But yeah, well, it is important to note that testing is a snapshot. Australia is the start of a very long season, so there's plenty of scope for things to change, and all the energy management stuff is hugely significant. We're not going to talk about that so much in this part of the season preview. There is a second part coming up, though, which will really get into the big picture, the energy management, etc. So Mercedes, though, Glenn, they were very, very good at winning, weren't they, for a long time? Then they kind of forgot. So I guess that's the other big question is, if the car, A, is really good enough, or they've tricked themselves again, had a lot of false dawns, and if it is good enough, is the team still what it once was?
I can't imagine it is, because I think you lose that sharpness when you're not fighting right at the front. And we actually saw in the early part of the hybrid era, I think Mercedes didn't have an operational sharpness because they got used to racing themselves. And then they had to kind of develop that from 2017 onwards when they either had Ferrari or eventually Red Bull to fight with. So yeah, they're not going to have that. And because I don't think they're going to have that early hybrid era advantage, that's another reason I'm pretty confident they're not going to be really, really dominant, because, yeah, George Russell has not been in the situation of having the opportunity to execute a championship before. And we saw how Lando Norris, it took him a while to get used to being that guy and dealing with all the pressure that comes with. So I am not another reason I'm not expecting Mercedes to completely run away with it. I don't think they're going to have the advantage where you can be so far ahead that you can kind of get back up to speed. But I'd be surprised if testing has shown us some of the false dawns that we saw in the ground effect era, because I saw after we were talking them up after Barcelona, some of our members were saying, is that not just because it was cold? I said, we weren't talking them up at Barcelona because of the pace. It was the program they did. At that point, it was how much work are you able to get through is an indication of where you are, rather than your lap times. And that was the early indicator we got from Mercedes, rather than, whoa, this is 2 seconds faster than everyone else.
I think that also applies to the works teams generally, though, doesn't it? Apart from maybe the brand new ones, if you like, Audi and let's call Honda, Aston brand new because Honda's come back and had to start again. Like Ferrari's program was impressive. Red Bull's program was impressive, and they were brand new. Yeah. But they're kind of like Mercedes adjacent, aren't they? Because it's basically take a load of people from Mercedes and start a kind of rival engine project. So maybe they had a bit of a head start in some ways over some of the
Red
others.
Bull high performance powertrains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good name, snappy. So I think that's kind of indicative of when you get a massive regulation shift like this, and the engines particularly like fundamentally change in their equation. Those programs that are works and established or more established or more prepared, they just have the chance of hitting the track running in a way that the customers don't, because it's all kind of new to them.
Now, if Mercedes is as competitive as it looks, now that doesn't necessarily mean way ahead. If it's got a car that can fight for the World Championship, then it's a really, really new test for Russell. He's passed every challenge up to this point. He's very, very quick. He wins races. He's got a bit of edge to him. But
looked good against Hamilton.
Exactly, yeah. So he's kind of passed every possible exam, but this is the final exam, isn't it? And we do see, Glenn, drivers have to kind of prove they can do it, don't they? And in a way, they have to prove they can do it to themselves. Russell's a very, very confident character. Some would say arrogant, but they all are to a greater or lesser degree. But there's always that thing of how will I cut it in a championship winning situation? Because it's not just, you can pick up a few wins along the way. It's like you've got to be week in, week out at or close to your best.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide. You can't get away with that weekend where you're a little bit off of it. You've also got a white hot spotlight on you the whole time. So these drivers, many of these drivers, and this applied to Norris as well, who I've already mentioned, it certainly applies to Russell. They've fought for and won championships in the junior ranks, but that is completely different to trying to do it in F1, where the scrutiny is just beyond what you can imagine, and you're trying to deal with all of that and the pressure. And if you're in Russell's situation, you finally got your call up to Mercedes and assumed you would immediately be fighting for championships, and you've had to wait your turn, which has meant that if the opportunity is coming up now, you've had all these years of pressure where you've been thinking, come on, I thought this was going to be my moment. And he'll be telling himself, I'm ready for this. I've competed with, whether it's his usual level, Lewis Hamilton in the same car. I want this opportunity. And if you're about to get it, suddenly it's like, right, you've got to step up. You've got to learn all the lessons Lando Norris had to learn primarily in the second half of 24 and the start of 25, I would say. And I'm sure Lando would tell George now, 18 months on, it's not as easy as it looks.
It also depends a lot, though, on how close it is. Because although you said you don't expect Mercedes to have as big an advantage as they did at the start of the hybrid era, it could be very 2x2 as a season. Say they had this just locked in edge of, 3/10 a lap that nobody can deal with until next winter. Then it becomes potentially a Russell versus Antonelli thing. And that's a much different test for Russell than if he's going up against proven Max Verstappen in a Red Bull that can fight for the championship, plus Norris and Piastri maybe in the McLaren. That's maybe the one element that's difficult for Mercedes. Yes, they've done well in testing, but McLaren have been beating them with their own engine package up until this point. And even though McLaren, they're discovering the new power unit, they're a bit behind in terms of just knowledge because they're a customer. If they can make that gap up quite quickly, there's no technical reason in terms of the spec they're allowed to run why they couldn't be a match for Mercedes. And we know from the end of the previous rules cycle that they were really running a better racing team and a better aero development team than Mercedes was. So there's a chance that Russell starts the season with an advantage, has to capitalise on it, and that's the pressure. But then Norris comes back at him through the season, all predicated on the Merc having an advantage that Ferrari and Red Bull can't match, of course. And
that would make it quite similar to 2025 in a way, where we all thought this is going to be a McLaren-only championship. Then suddenly you had Verstappen to deal with. Yeah. There's nobody worse to have hunting you down than Max. But I can definitely see a situation where the Mercedes are ahead at the front and somebody starts to catch up. And with the season being so long now, was it 24 races plus the sprints, there is time for someone to catch up in a way that there wouldn't have been in the past?
There was a very revealing moment in Abu Dhabi at the back end of last year. I think on the Thursday, myself and I think 3 or 4 other journalists, we had a 15-20 minute thing with George Russell. And I asked him something about, I probably used the phrase, you're entering F1 middle age, because I love that phrase. And sort of the clock is ticking. You've shown you can do everything, you've improved, because he's improved quite a bit over the past few years. The mistakes have been cut out. Probably the least error-prone driver of all last year, I would argue.
And you wanted to wind him up.
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah, do drivers take that badly when you say that?
They know. They're all impatient.
That's not why I asked.
I think they probably rather I didn't say it, but I don't think any athletes like to be reminded of their own sporting mortality.
What do you say to Alonso? Do you call him geriatric?
You're a racing granddad.
I'm pretty sure I may have had a question where I've called him an old man in F1 terms. But
brilliant.
Anyway, but I asked him about that. You feel obviously you've earned the right to fight for a world championship. Do you want to test yourself? I can't remember the exact phrasing, but he sort of did the usual, I want to do this. And then he zeroed in on Max Verstappen. It was Max that came up. I didn't ask about Max specifically.
So he chose to focus on him.
So in George Russell's head, implicitly, you can take from that, he's just dismissed Lando, Piastri, even Leclerc. I think he thinks, I can deal with them. Max, I think he looks at and he thinks, he will think he can deal with him, but he won't know. And I think there's a real feeling in his mind, firstly, that he needs to test himself against Verstappen, and secondly, that Verstappen's the one he needs to, every battle he has with him is about more than just that one argument or that one thing. And we've seen the disagreements in the past.
We've seen this over years, haven't we?
Exactly.
And it's all building up to this moment, I think. Yeah.
Exactly, which if we could have a Russell v Verstappen battle, I mean, the ideal is Russell Verstappen, they're all in there because that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
But Russell versus Verstappen is probably the one of all of those, with the exception of Hamilton because of the Verstappen-Hamilton history, that Russell Verstappen one is the one that has the potential to really explode, because I think Verstappen will know he needs to kind of put Russell in his place. He'll feel he needs to. And Russell will think, well, I need to be a massive pain now. So I don't think you'll see what we saw in 21, where Hamilton at times was willing to kind of back out and defer because he thought, well, I can play the long game, because he was kind of established. Russell, I think, if he's
he's always got to lay a marker.
Exactly. If he's in a 50-50 scenario, he'll feel, well, maybe we do have to risk a collision, or I'm always going to back out.
Well, history would dictate that's the case, right? Because Verstappen has been completely uncompromising since he came in. That's what Hamilton learned. So that sets the new mark of, well, if you want to race with me, the biggest dog in the pack, you're going to have to lay it all out. And Russell probably recognises he needs to try to be an irritant. It's a bit of mind gamesing and trying to get in Verstappen's head. I think that's probably impossible. I don't think Verstappen cares, but you've got to try and throw those grenades at him just to see if there's any way of penetrating the armour. Maybe it's also a little bit, maybe it slightly shows a lack of self-assurance, that he feels like the need to talk himself up in
to be seen company. To be doing it.
Yeah, because I guess Verstappen's the outlier for Russell compared to the others, just because of the slight generational gap in the junior categories. Like, he raced against Norris, didn't he? They did the same F2 season and Russell was champion and Norris was third. So he will just automatically think, even from that period, I've got him covered. And then he probably uses Albon as an approximation for Leclerc because they were teammates, or maybe they came across each other in GP3. I don't know with Russell exactly, but he probably thinks, well, by proxy, I've got him covered too. I know I've got Lewis covered because I beat him in F1 in the same car, but Max is the one guy he hasn't gone up against properly. So it's kind of in his own head as a challenge I need to rise to.
Do you think, I mean, you've got experience in this, obviously, when Max Verstappen started in car racing in the Ferrari Florida Winter Series, you two had an incident.
We did,
and
yeah.
it was very much that you were in the right. So do you feel that you left a marker early on, and that's what Russell needs to do? If Russell had your experience, he'd be there, because you are the driver that Verstappen will fear.
Well, yeah, but well, thanks very much. That might be the biggest compliment you've ever paid me.
I think fearing it, this guy's slow in my way.
I think the problem was that, he was fundamentally much quicker, so I was in his way. And also the protection of his dad is probably the one person he fears more than anyone in F1. So I think the die were loaded in my favour on that occasion.
But it's certainly, if Russell's sensible, he'll be super confident. They all are. But if he's thinking about it, there'll be moments where he's like, oh, can I take Max? Because Max is, not just on the outside, he's heralded as the greatest driver in F1 at the moment. Inside, they know he is the one to beat. Yeah. And that's why there's just that implicit dismissal of the others. But we should, Glenn, just briefly consider Antonelli as well, because he's in a fascinating situation, because last year was kind of a mixed bag, finished quite strong. Abu Dhabi wasn't great, but he had some good performances late on. He's got a really, really good opportunity here to, if the Mercedes is as strong as it is, it's his job to kind of push himself into the championship narrative and not just be a number two. And he will know, just because he's a young driver only in his second year, he knows that if he wants to fulfill his ambitions, he's got to beat Russell.
Yeah, to make the 2014 comparison again, I guess he's got to be Nico Rosberg, not be a number two. Like, Nico didn't accept in those years of well, Lewis is the big star, I guess I'm just going to be the guy who wins when he can't. Nico found something within himself on and off the track to make a fight of it. Obviously, he had more experience by the time that came around. Antonelli's got to get to that level sooner. If the advantage is big for Mercedes, there's obviously potentially at worst some easy second places on the table, but that won't be enough because he's come in with such hype and expectation. If Mercedes are dominant and then George Russell's winning comfortably ahead of Antonelli, who's always second, everyone's going to go, well, Antonelli's not up to it. So he can't come in and kind of bank safe secondary results in the best car if they have that advantage. And if they don't have a big advantage and it's really condensed and you've got all these front-running teams fighting each other, you're not going to have to be much off it to suddenly find yourself kind of fifth or sixth, and with Red Bulls or Ferraris or McLarens getting in the way. So I do feel there's going to be a lot of pressure and expectation on him. You're right, the rookie season was a big mixed bag. I would say. And this time, you can get away with a bit of that in your rookie year. I don't think he got massive leeway last year because Mercedes hyped him up so much, but there's not going to be any of that
backing
this
away,
year.
weren't they?
They kind of had to wheel back on having, bigged him up too much. But there won't be any of that this year. There'll be nowhere to hide.
Yeah, and it's important to note, isn't it, Ben, that people say, well, he's still young, second season, he's learning. You don't get that anymore in Formula One.
Well, because of Max.
Well, exactly.
He's completely changed that game. I know they rewrote the rules so no one could do a Max again, but it still stands as if you're good enough, it doesn't matter how old you are.
Yeah, but even back to Hamilton with Alonso, etc. I think for a while it's been there, and that's something that will be in Antonelli's mind because he's in F1 to be a world champion, to be a great. He's not there to be kind of a very good driver who wins a dozen races in his career. He's there to win 50, 60, 70 races and multiple world championships. So it's a lot to ask for him, but he is quick. Interlagos last year, he was faster than Russell throughout, qualifying and race pace. He was just better than Russell. So he's at least had that one where he said, look, I can do it. And that's what he's got to look to, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's using your analogy of Rosberg and Hamilton. They're in the inverse positions, aren't they? Because Russell is the more established guy who's been at Mercedes longer, and Rosberg used that to his advantage for as long as he could, basically against Lewis, who was fundamentally probably the more talented driver. I don't know if Antonelli is the more talented driver than Russell. Obviously, Mercedes hyped him for a reason. So they obviously believe in
You still got to do it when you get there.
But you've got to deliver. I think there were enough glimpses, as you outlined, that he can do it. The one thing I think that might be in his favour, depending on obviously how this kind of weird new Formula One plays out, is that he does seem to be more attacking and maybe a little bit more comfortable with the car being unstable dynamically on the corner entry. So if we get to that point with these cars where that matters, I think he might have a fundamental attitude to it that slightly helps him out versus Russell. But it wasn't night and day different. And I don't know within the context of F1 technically now whether he'll be able to make that advantage, if it is an advantage, count. So it's really going to come down to not making the mistakes and just making the most of whatever advantage technically Mercedes have over the rest.
Yeah. The one pass I would give him for last year is that Mercedes ended that regulations cycle still lost, still not understanding it. So you're in a team that goes into each weekend not really knowing, are we going to hit on the magical sweet spot that we basically do by accident
in certain tracks,
exactly.
Certain conditions,
so he didn't really have a level baseline the whole time to go, well, I know the car's going to be this good. I know the team are going to know what they're doing. So hopefully with the rule change, he will have that. He'll have a bit more stability, just walking in each weekend, knowing what to expect from the car.
I think it brings the established driver down potentially as well. I mean, this is an argument used at Red Bull too, that it's a great time for Hadjar to go in there because it's a complete reset. I do think there is something in this idea that all the bank of experience you've built up, it can help you in certain ways, but the cars are all new for everybody. So he starts off with Russell kind of not so high up. He's more within reach depending on kind of how each weekend plays out.
And just to pick up on something you said about the grip level and that kind of thing, if you did pick out a little weakness in Russell, sometimes there's kind of a little hint of the Piastris with the lower grip tracks and the car moving around where he's not absolutely at his very best. It's not quite anything to that same extent, but
that's where Mercedes was always good, though, wasn't it? Like they're the low grip, low temperature. They could generate the tyre temperature. So maybe that's been helping him out. And you haven't really had a fair comparison with the other drivers.
I think either way, if the Mercedes is as good as we think it's going to be, then it's going to be a really, really good test of those two drivers. Right, we're going to move on to Ferrari now. Ben.
Hello.
You've put your money on the table. You talked up Leclerc. He topped testing.
It's about to bite you already.
Have you been tricked by testing times? Have you looked at it and thought, they're going to be 9/10 a lap faster, 8/10, whatever it was?
No, I'm not that naive. Give me some credit. I mean, you asked me to be contrarian.
You can't be contrarian with yourself. You have to be consistent internally.
So what's the question?
The question is, Charles Leclerc, Ferrari, we're not expecting him to be quite as good as the testing time said, but
sure.
Where do you think they're going to end up shaking out? Do you think it's going to be a slow burn of a season from a good starting position, or could they shock?
I don't have faith over the course of a whole season that they can get it done. Like nothing that we've seen in the last, 10, 15 years of Ferrari and their ability to develop a car suggests that they can take the baton and run with it all the way to the finish. I think what advantage or performance they have at the start is going to be the best we see of them. So they have to capitalise on it. I think they are behind Mercedes overall on pure pace general management of the whole thing, but they have that start line advantage, it seems. So that could be quite powerful in racing situations if the racing is difficult, if you can't overtake on the tighter tracks. We know Ferrari are good anyway. So I think there's a good chance that particularly Charles Leclerc wins many more races than he has done in recent seasons early on. But is it enough as the development war kicks in, as teams find more performance and unlock things? I can see McLaren coming into the picture a lot stronger as the season goes on. Red Bull and Max, you can never write them off. And they're starting from probably a better baseline than anyone expected. So I just feel like Ferrari gets crowded out as they inevitably run down some kind of blind alley or trip themselves up. I'd like to think that they suddenly unlock a perfect season, but just everything. They always find a way for it to go wrong. And I've yet to see a coherent body of work where Ferrari goes, this is our baseline car, and we did this and this and this and this, and it improved the car by this much and in this area. It's always like, oh, this is wrong. Let's fix it by doing this. Oh, that hasn't worked. Now what are we going to do? Oh, now we're panicking. Oh, the Monza special was normally okay. But apart from
End of 24 was good.
End of 24 was good, but it was, too little too late, wasn't it? And then they threw it in the bin and messed up 25. So I just don't have any faith in that kind of coherent development path.
Yeah, and that's the worry for Leclerc, isn't it, Glenn? Because everything we said about Russell, you can say times 10 for Leclerc, because he's been at the front showing how good he is longer. So he's been waiting for this championship chance. And if he doesn't get it, or even if he gets what he got in 22, where he was kind of a title contender for the first quarter of the season before Red Bull just vanished, that's not going to be good enough for him, is it?
No, I think that 22 element means it is ramped up for him compared to Russell, because, he had a brief taste of thinking he had it and it got taken away, which is even worse than signing up for something thinking you're going to get it and then it never quite comes. So, I would imagine with every year that passes, with every early run of races where it's not good enough, or every time you get to the end of the season and all those things Ben just laid out have happened again, you're going to be getting more and more fraught with just going, when is it going to come together? Or if you're Leclerc and you're looking at Ferrari, you're going, is it ever going to come together? Like for how long can I commit my future to this?
But he's been getting ahead of that, hasn't he? There's been those rumblings of like, well, we really need to start this season strong, because he's getting impatient.
It's totally understandable. He's been there a long time. He signed a long contract. Okay, those are lucrative and there are ways out of them, but he's tried to show his commitment, and I can see why he'd be thinking, I need to see something back in the other direction.
He feels like the most desperate for it to work out of that group in the front. Like, as you say, he's been there so long, so many like false dawns.
F1 middle age as well.
F1 middle age.
I don't recall telling him he's an F1.
He doesn't look F1 middle age though, does he?
I did once tell him a few years ago. I went to an LA Lakers game before Las Vegas, and they put drivers up. They put any star names that are there. They put them up on the screen for everyone to cheer about. And
were you up there?
Sadly not. It's an oversight. But it's funny, they had Esteban Ocon was there as well, and he was up on the screen, and he got a little ripple of recognition. They put Charles Leclerc up. Nothing.
What?
So of course, when I saw Leclerc in the paddock on Thursday, did I say to him, "Well, they put you up on the screen?" Nobody. People know who Esteban Ocon is more than you. So
that's worse than calling him middle-aged.
That's almost worse than being stuck in non-championship winning Ferraris, isn't it?
But it's. It's frustrating for him, but it's frustrating for us as well. Leclerc is a phenomenal driver.
Yeah, incredible.
He's capable of absolutely brilliant things. And we're just waiting for this championship chance, and it's just not coming.
The first time I ever saw him in a race, he turned up as a guest driver in Formula Renault Euro Cup. I want to say, I can't remember which year that would have been, early 2010s. And there was a race, I feel like there was a wet race at the Hungaroring or something, where he started at the back and finished on the podium. And I didn't know who he was at that point. I went, who the hell is that guy?
Yeah.
From that day, I've followed his career really closely, just going, this guy's really, really special. Obviously, I covered Jules Bianchi a lot, who was a bit like a big brother to him. They're in the same management stable. And then obviously once we lost Jules, I loved the idea of like Leclerc completing that story. And he got it by going to Ferrari and winning at Monza and doing all these things that, maybe were in Bianchi's future. But all that junior career told me he is world champion material. He just needs the car and the team to give him what he deserves.
The one thing I think might aid him this year, if Mercedes are the team to beat, we've already discussed how they're not really quite as sharp as maybe they once were, or
Ferrari going to swoop in?
Well,
betting on Ferrari's operational sharpness.
Only in that. Well, I'm trying to reach for the positive, I suppose. We are checking. But you mentioned 22 and the quarter of a season, but Ferrari were worse objectively then than I think than they are now. So you've had an improvement, maybe not enough, but you've had an improvement in Ferrari over the years intervening. Mercedes a bit stagnant, probably. So it might equal out, especially with this start line advantage. You're going to keep coming back to it, but there might just be enough that quarter of a season becomes half a season because Mercedes aren't quite able to grab the opportunity in the way that a Red Bull might be able to, or a McLaren. And McLaren might just take a little bit too long to get on top of everything to be straight in the fight. Red Bull, for different reasons, the same phenomenon. So Verstappen's kind of hindered. Norris and Piastri can't get there quickly enough. So maybe that helps Leclerc in that he might be able to just capitalise on this early bit of performance Ferrari have, get ahead of Russell, and then do maybe a job of clinging on. But at the same time, I think Leclerc also shown he can make errors when he really wants this and maybe wants it a bit too much. Yeah. So if he's that 22 version of himself and starts chucking it into the barriers, that he won't do it at Paul Ricard because they're not racing there, but that kind of thing, we need to make sure that desperation to win is under control. If it is, then I think he's just got to go with it, run, bank as many points as he can early on. He might have a chance. But interesting, we're not talking up Lewis Hamilton in that conversation.
There is the small matter of the 7-time world champion in the other car. That's the thing, Glenn, isn't it? I think Hamilton, for me, it's a wait and see because testing, he didn't look great early in Bahrain, but seemed to get better and better. And I just don't know because he's made some upbeat noises, but I think you've got to be really careful about taking too much out of Hamilton and what he's saying, whether it's upbeat or downbeat, because that kind of goes up and down just circumstantially. And I don't know exactly where he's going to be sort of a support act for Leclerc or whether he can recapture the old magic. What would you expect?
The thing is, I think before we saw what happened last year, I went into last year thinking that if Lewis got on well with that car and that it was Mercedes that were the problem rather than the perhaps generation of cars in general, I would have still expected him to be half a tenth off Leclerc for ultimate pace. And I did think that this time last year, I thought that even if Hamilton has a good season, Leclerc will come out on top.
Same.
So I'm still here now thinking that even if Hamilton's happier with these cars, and I'm not certain he is, he might not have the specific problems that he had with the ground effect generation, but I do wonder if the fact he doesn't like the formula is going to prevent him from maybe getting the most out of these cars, because I know we're going to argue about that a bit more in our second episode, but he is one of the drivers being more negative about it. I agree with him. I agree with the things that he doesn't like about them. But yeah, even if he gets on with the cars, I would still expect him to be just a fraction behind Leclerc.
He doesn't like, if I'm right, he doesn't like the engine braking behaviour of Ferrari either, does he? He certainly didn't last year. And I imagine these cars are going to be very engine brakey. So I feel like there's already fundamentally at least one specific technical area where we know Leclerc is very comfortable and Hamilton isn't. So beyond just the general Max type, I hate the formula. Again, I agree with them. Like it doesn't look great from a driving point of view. I just think everything you see fundamentally shows that Leclerc is just faster. And that's surely getting into Hamilton's head. You know, he's come from a couple of years at Mercedes where Russell was just edging ahead of him, but you could write it off as, well, he's leaving the team and he's kind of, you know, his time is up. He's gone for this amazing fresh start at Ferrari, bucket list stuff, and the other guy's quicker, just is. So he must know that better than anyone, and doesn't matter if you've won 7 world championships. You're 7 world championships, you're as good as your last race, and the body of recent evidence just suggests that Hamilton's just not quite there anymore.
But there's still that just residual possibility that he could pick up. So that's going to be a really important storyline, I think, in the early races, him versus Leclerc. Now, Glenn, McLaren, we've not really mentioned them except in passing. Lando Norris is world champion, of course. So Oscar Piastri as well. He was in the hunt. Are we just writing them off as a championship threat? I
don't think we should write them off. I can see why Ben talked about at the start, the kind of the manufacturer. The manufacturers come to the fore at the start of particularly new engine regulations. That's understandable. I don't see this being like the start of the hybrid era, though, where the works teams have a massive advantage that sticks. I can see why they would get up to speed quicker.
But they're also not allowed to, are they?
No. I mean, that's another difference, isn't it? Like, I don't think we should be positioning McLaren as Williams were at the beginning of hybrids, just because Mercedes has a big advantage. Actually, Williams were still a long way off. There was that Andrea Stella quote at the back end of last week, wasn't there, where when he made a football analogy, he said we're going to be in defensive mode at the start of the season, but looking to counter-attack. I saw some people in our team at the race were picking holes in that argument, but I sort of get it. We're going to play slightly conservative, look after ourselves, bank results, and then eventually we're going to try and hit people when the opportunity.
Get it to our pacey wingers.
Yeah, I mean, hit them on the brake.
Yeah,
Norris on the right.
It's far too much. It's far too much football chat for this podcast. But I think that McLaren. I don't think that's McLaren managing expectations. I think that's McLaren telling us where they expect to be. I feel like this era of McLaren have been quite good at saying when they're perhaps not quite at it, but where they want to get to. And I do think that partly because what you said there about the fact that the manufacturers can't have a literal technological advantage under these rules, you're going to start ahead with understanding when you're Mercedes, but McLaren will catch up very quickly. All of these teams are incredible scientific operations now. They are going to learn this stuff very, very quickly. I reckon even by mid-season, if you ask the teams, how is your understanding of this formula now versus where we were coming out of the 2 Bahrain tests, they will say night and day difference. And I think that means big established teams like McLaren, to make that Williams comparison again, McLaren are in a much better place than Williams were coming into those regs. McLaren will get up to speed, I think, as the season goes on. And again, as we said, the season is so long, I think if they have a good car, if they develop it well, they will get there. Plus, they've got they've potentially still got the driver lineup that is the most balanced in terms of two that can get the job done.
One problem I think McLaren have got, I mean, if it's purely about chassis and car development, you'd say, well, yeah, they're better than Mercedes. They've proven it.
Well, they have been.
Race execution and sharpness based on recent history. But this whole energy management thing, like they've been lobbying quite hard for changes based on the idea that, the racing might not be what we want it to be, or it's not, going to work very well, going to be chaotic and whatnot. But no team ever, even if they claim to, puts Formula One ahead of its own competitive ambition. So I just wonder if in the background of that is a fundamental lack of understanding, which you would expect for the reasons outlined, but they see a pathway where actually we can't get on top of this quickly enough.
Or they
for
just
this
think
season.
the change is the easier way to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Or there could be the other point of difference. Obviously, cooling's quite important because one of the big things with the battery, when you're charging and discharging it constantly, the duty on the battery is very intense, and temperature management is going to be a limiting factor to a greater or lesser extent for everyone. So that there's a possible offset there. We don't have anything to say there is, but that's one of the interesting question marks for them. But also Norris and Piastri are going to be interesting. Norris, does he kick on having won the championship? Piastri, can he bounce back? Don't underestimate Piastri. I think people are I think there's a tendency to think, he missed out on the World Championship by a few points last year and he had that difficult spell at the end. He's washed, he's rubbish.
Yeah, as if that was his one shot.
Get rid of him. Yeah, it's not. So, yeah, I'd agree. I think McLaren are going to come on strong. Now, the outsider, Ben, in this top 4 group is Isaac Hadjar. He is literally, I was going through the odds, looked across 25 bookmakers. He's like 95-1 on average to win the World Championship.
Were you tempted?
The next favourite is Piastri at 13-1 in terms of the seventh favourite. Russell's just over 2-1 with Verstappen, second favourite. And obviously Hadjar's got this big challenge of going in alongside Verstappen. We haven't spoken about Verstappen so much because he's just such a given as a driver. Yeah. We don't need to. But whatever Red Bull's position is, whether it's the best team, the fourth best team, whether it's pushing for wins, just for podiums, Hadjar's got that job of establishing himself. Do you think he can do it up against a driver like Verstappen?
That's such a difficult question to answer. I mean, he's got to believe he can. And I think he's probably got a better chance than any of the recent guys who've gone into that hot seat. Not only because I think he might be fundamentally a slightly better driver than Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, maybe even Sergio Perez et al. Just the rules reset. It does give him a better chance because however good Verstappen is, he's got to start from zero in terms of learning everything. But if Verstappen is fully motivated, I think there's a question mark over that actually, whether would he like this or dislike this formula to such an extent that he just thinks, you know what, can I really be bothered?
I think they're competitive enough
Yeah.
that I think this would have been an issue if Red Bull had like the 6th fastest car. But I think if they're
in the game
somewhere in the game, that's going to be enough for him.
But I don't think Verstappen's a quiet quitter. I think he's just a quitter. And I don't mean that as in he hasn't got the fight.
All or nothing.
I think he's look, I don't like this. I've done everything in F1. I'll go and do something else. Yeah. A quitter in that regard. I don't think he'll quite quit and just sort of Raikkonen his way around.
No.
So,
but he's been talking up those other things.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an interview I think he did with Apple the end of last week, mentioning how, you know, enjoying time with his family and his new kid and the other projects he's got on the go. Like, that was like one of the first answers he gave in terms of, are you looking forward to the season? So it's already there in terms of, well, actually, no, I'm not looking forward to this season. I'm just going to do my job. That might be enough if Hadjar is super hungry, that they, you know, to find the odd chink in the arm. But I still think that's a desperate reach. I think Verstappen is so good, and if there are things to learn, he's going to learn them quicker or as quick as anybody else. You already saw in testing the kind of downshift technique, going down to first gear, using all the engine braking to recharge the battery, mashing it. Like, he was first onto that.
And the trouble with that is, well, not the trouble, but the challenge with that is if you do that, you're dynamically generally have an impact on the car that the rear is going to get quite light. So
which he's good at.
Who is better at kind of controlling it when it's a little bit...
I wonder.
It's Verstappen, isn't it? I mean, it's no surprise. People talk about, the car's built around this, that and the other. The primary reason Verstappen is really hard to be a teammate of successfully is he's one of the all-time great drivers.
Exactly.
And very good drivers get made to look mediocre up alongside them. That's the reason. And of course he's well suited to these rules. He would be well suited to any set of rules because of his abilities.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you've just outlined why it's basically an impossible job for Hadjar. So I think he'll do well, and I think he'll do better than previous incumbents, but I don't think he's going to be a match for or a beater of Verstappen. If he is, then, I mean, that just shows that, like he is, everybody's misread him, including Red Bull up to now.
The concern I have is you and Scott Mitchell-Malm were at testing, doing a lot of trackside updates. Some of those went out on social media. A lot of them went into the race members club. Whenever you were doing it on a day where Hadjar was in the Red Bull rather than Max, you were always caveating what the Red Bull looked like, because you said, I think Max is going to get back in the car tomorrow and it's going to look completely different. Yeah. Tomorrow would come around, you go, the car looks completely different. So Max appears to have got on with it straight away. And what we've seen previously with Perez was Sergio got closest before the car got developed. Yeah. And when the car was something that Max wasn't that happy with, and then when they went down this route of, right, the ultimate lap time is to make this car mega pointy and hard to drive because that's what Max can deal with, suddenly Perez would fall further back. If we haven't got that at the start of the cycle this time, it could be very hard for Hadjar right from the beginning.
I think it also shows that one caveat we had about last season with the racing balls being particularly driver friendly. You know, they're not easy to drive, but maybe easier to access the performance of than other cars. Maybe that's evident now that he's got into a Red Bull, even though it's a new regulations Red Bull. There's just this, you don't unlearn all the things. There's still going to be echoes of the past and traits in the car that are
because you know what your driver likes as well.
Exactly. You know what's effective, what's won races. You know, the Racing Bulls was not a race-winning car. The Red Bull was, even if it wasn't the best Red Bull. And I think he's probably discovering the first signs of, okay, this is what a Red Bull feels like compared to what I'm used to. He might have just had a bit too easy a ride in his rookie season.
Yeah, but he will be looking at the start of the season. He will be thinking, I reckon I'll find a way to beat Max. Because that's what they all think. Yep. That's the psychology of it. And that is the thing that means once in a while you might get someone who could do it. I don't think he will, but it's just that possibility that he might. And if Hadjar wants to be the greatest driver in Formula One today, Max is the guy he's got to be. It always comes back to Max is currently the centre of gravity in F1 as a driver, just as Lewis Hamilton was before, just as many other drivers, well, if not that many, but a few other drivers have been before. So interesting storyline to watch. And of course, Glenn, you mentioned trackside watching there. That's a big part of the Race Members Club offering. We've got a 90% off your first month special offer going on. What are you getting excited about in terms of what, Scott and John are going to be on the ground in Australia. I'll be there in China. We're going to be doing a lot during the year. Anything that you particularly enjoy, or do you just every time we send something back, you think, oh, not them again?
No, I think the opposite. I love the stuff that we do. I'm very excited about in these first couple of races. The interest in the season is the highest it's going to be unless we get to a final round decider. You know, we see that all the time, and people know the least at the moment. So even just the idea of Scott and John are touching down in Australia this week, and they're going to be sending through snippets. They're going to be kind of just just chatting to us once they get there about what they're feeling, or if they start going to events, they're going to be talking about that. I think the big hit we have in the members club is obviously our in-car insights, which is when you guys are driving to or from the circuits, you just fire up a recorder and have a more kind of informal chat, because those conversations happen in the car on the way back to a hotel or those sort of things anyway. We've sort of turned them into a piece of content. But what I also am amused by is that they've been so popular that even if you don't travel by car, you find another way to do them. We had in-casino insights in Vegas, didn't we? And
the casino wasn't moving, in fairness. We weren't travelling in it. We were just
that's true. Yeah. You found somewhere to sit down. So
you weren't just going up and down the escalators.
We should have done, yeah.
Yeah, it's become a thing now, hasn't it? Even if you're not in a car, find somewhere to sit and give some insight.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's what it's all about, and it's good for us to work through some of our ideas as well. So some of the spectacular, insightful conclusions that you might hear on this sort of podcast, you'll hear us developing our magnificent nonsense theories.
Well, I will say, it's kind of, for podcasts like this, you guys are at the test, we weren't. It's kind of a cheat sheet in a way to pick up on all that stuff that was coming through for the members as well. So even we arrive at a situation like this ahead of Australia more informed. And we should also say, Ed, a race weekend coming up means that it's the first chance in a while for people to tell you how massively wrong you are when your driver rankings come out.
Oh, yes, driver rankings. I'll be ranking the 22 drivers now. It's going to take me longer as well. I'll be charging you more for doing that, Glenn. But, it's normally the Tuesday, generally after the race. I'll take everybody's questions about my driver rankings. Why did you put Liam Lawson 12th and...
Let the pylons begin.
Yeah,
is that a preview?
It's always, but actually, although there's maybe a preview, I don't know. But although there's not that many pylons. It's a really, really good community as well, and I like the discourse and the back and forth and all that kind of thing. It keeps me on my toes.
I like when you bite back.
Yeah, once in a while, if I feel people
stand your ground.
If I feel people haven't been listening, that's the thing. I like a well structured argument. Tell me I'm wrong, but explain why I'm wrong. That is how we all learn. But anyway, it's 90% off for your first month. So click the link in the episode description or head to Patreon, search for the Race or the Race Members Club to find out how to get your F1 2026 paddock pass. Well, let's get to talk about outside the top four now, Glenn. Racing Bulls. It's not always a pleasant environment being a young Red Bull driver. Liam Lawson, of course, who last year was starting the year as a Red Bull racing driver and was very quickly busted back down to Racing Bulls, plus Arvid Lindblad. So how much pressure is on those two? What do you expect may befall them this season? Will they even make it to the end of the year?
I think there's more pressure on Lawson because he's been there a while and he's got a new rookie teammate coming in. If you're established and you end up with a rookie teammate, you have to shade them at least in the first part of that season. If Lindblad very quickly gets the upper hand, that's probably Lawson done longer term. I don't necessarily think that means out mid-season anymore. I'd be very interested to see what the new era, the post-Helmut Marko era of Red Bull looks like and how they behave with that sort of stuff. But for Lindblad, I feel that without that kind of Marko shadow hanging over you, you probably can come in slightly more relaxed as a Red Bull rookie in that whole sort of family. So yeah, I think if you're saying there's pressure there, it's all on Lawson. Obviously, the pressure ramps up on rookies if they don't perform in that opening clutch of races, though.
And of course, that Racing Bulls, it's a little bit tricky to drive at times in testing. It's going to be in that midfield pack, but a bit lower down. But Ben, Haas look very, very strong in that midfield pack. We know how impressive Ollie Behrman got, particularly in the second half of last season. But Esteban Ocon, who you know well of old, is an interesting question, isn't he? Because he's capable of being very, very good. He put in some strong race drives last year, but he did struggle a bit too often, particularly in qualifying. So it's quite a lot at stake for him.
Yeah, massive season for him upcoming. If he can be Abu Dhabi spec Esteban Ocon all the way through the year, then he's going to be fine. But I think Behrman is looking like fundamentally a better, quicker, more dynamic driver. I think the team itself is saying that. And also the team is getting on Ocon's case quite a lot. You know, there's this quote from Ayo Komatsu saying, well, he's 10 years experience, has won a race. We need to see more from him. And you don't normally get that. I mean, I know Komatsu's a particularly honest character, but it's quite unusual for a team to be piling the pressure on its own driver in that way. So I think
Esteban knows that as well.
Yeah,
he doesn't need to be told it.
Yeah, I think Behrman is in his head. I think a lot of what we saw last year in qualifying, I know there was sometimes there was a legitimate thing with the brakes, but more often than not, it looked and read a bit like he's looking for excuses. That was why this guy's just fundamentally quicker. I don't think that's going to change. There might be that the formula itself just comes back to him a bit and maybe neuters Behrman a little bit, but I I don't see it. I kind of think it's Behrman 1, Ocon 2, and Ocon's best bet is to just chip away and get closer and make sure he's just not leaving stuff on the table. That means Komatsu's getting on his case.
Yeah, and Behrman looked strong in testing. I think if we went into a qualifying session in Bahrain, the two drivers that most likely would be in Q3 would be Behrman and Pierre Gasly in the Alpine, and obviously Glen Alpine are looking good. But there's big question marks over Franco Colapinto. He's finally got a full season. He's finally got pre-season. We know there's real ability in there. So what are you expecting to see from him?
I think this season is finally the season where we get the answer of what the real Colapinto is. Is it that guy who made a great impact when he first came into Williams before that slightly went awry? Last season, you obviously had the disruption, as you said there, of not having a pre-season, getting dropped in after a few races and dropped into a nightmare situation. Just a team that was basically counting down the days to the end of the season so they could focus on making their Mercedes engine switch and having a new regs. It looks like those decisions appear to be paying off in the short term at least. So he's going to have a platform to work with. But as you've hinted at there, he's going to have a very high benchmark in Pierre Gasly. So you're not going to be able to leave much on the table, because I don't think Gasly will give you much. Gasly's not an up and down performer when he feels comfortable in a midfield car. So he's going to make life very difficult for Colapinto. So Colapinto's got to use this pre-season that he's finally had. It's weird that he's been around for so long and has never had a proper pre-season before. He's got to use that. And I think there's a lot of expectation on him. You know, you don't, we've just said there, Ocon's been around a long time, much longer than someone like Franco, but you don't get to hang around in F1 kind of for free, because there's always someone else, sort of snapping at these drivers' heels. So at some point, he's got to show that, right, I've got the tools now. I've got a team that's in a better place. I've got a car underneath me. I've had all the prep that I need. Now I've got to get after that teammate who's doing a really good job and he's probably going to be a midfield leader.
Yeah, and that will be exactly what's in Colapinto's mind. He'll think, I can go and beat Gasly. Now, the other team, there's kind of a four-car front midfield group. Audi's the last car in that. Started testing in Bahrain a bit worryingly, but actually kept improving. And by the final day, they were showing some pretty interesting pace. So, yeah, they could be pretty impressive in a midfieldy kind of way. Gabriel
Sauber, yeah.
Got to talk about Sauber. Now, Gabriel Bortoletto's interesting because he had a weird season last year in that the first half was quite impressive and it got a little bit patchy in the back end.
Bit confusing for a rookie, that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. There wasn't a clear pattern for it, really, but it's just it wasn't coming together. So I think that's the thing we need to see. Bortoletto needs to, I think, see off Hülkenberg to show how good he is. And I rate Bortoletto. There's a lot of ability there. Alonso, obviously, his management company deals with Bortoletto. So that's going to be one of the storylines there. And second season, yeah, try and beat Hülkenberg. But let's talk about the Williams drivers now. Williams look like they're a little step off that midfield group. Do you see any reason for Alex Albon or Carlos Sainz to be optimistic?
Not at the moment, no. It just feels like Williams have gone back to 2024 spec, despite talking such a good game.
Yeah, it's such a shame.
Everything was thrown into the 2026 basket, wasn't it? They were loudly proclaiming their 25 car to be the first to come out of the wind tunnel and everything focused on this year. Val's building the team up for this season. This is our opportunity to take the big step. And it's like they've gone backwards. The car is overweight. Almost, it was late, wasn't it, compared to others? These are all old stories that we've heard before. It just feels like you worry that the team is just fundamentally limited. And actually what we saw last year is kind of the best of Williams, the ceiling, not the basement level. I'm really disappointed for the reasons you outlined there. I remember how early it was in the season that we were doing stories on Williams have switched. Williams are the first to publicly declare full development switch to 2026. Now these stories of progress, it's never perfectly linear. There are bumps or massive troughs in the road sometimes. That's what this has to be. But I do share that concern that are we maybe just hitting up against some kind of fundamental limitations at Williams that will take. It doesn't mean they can't be fixed, but they'll actually take longer to fix rather than the stuff that had been fixed up to this point. But yeah, I'm just disappointed. I expected a lot more. And for the start of pre-season
to end up being so just all over the place. It does feel like old Williams.
If you think that like George Russell last year was talking up Williams as a potential championship threat because of how well they were doing car-wise and Mercedes having this perceived engine advantage, I mean, they look so far away from that, don't they? They have properly gone backwards, and it's such a waste considering that we expect the Mercedes power unit to be the best. And a team like Alpine, which was absolute chaos last season, and by contrast, to be in the fight to lead the midfield. That is where Williams should be as a minimum, and they're not. Yeah,
it's concerning that they've got this weight problem, that they need to not be doing that, because it's something about myself. But
but you've got an aggressive programme of weight reduction.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. Well, they've got one as well, but they're not going to be on the weight limit for Australia. That's certainly the case. And the positive spin on that is, well, weight off is effectively free performance. Not that it doesn't cost you anything, because it will, so that's a distraction.
It shouldn't be happening.
But also, if you take off 10 kilos or whatever, just I don't know how overweight they are, that is pure performance that will instantly deliver. But they've got this slightly high rate car. It didn't look like it was in a great place mechanically and setup wise. So I think even if you remove that limitation that they'll work through, I think there's concerns about where the car is. It's little lockups, balance problems. So that's the concern. So I think, it's going to be a certainly tough start to the season for Williams. Now, there's going to be a battle at the back, Glenn. We talked lots about Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso on our last podcast. How about teammate Lance Stroll? Has he got anything to look forward to other than trying to beat Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas in the Cadillac?
I don't know how to answer that, but I've been thinking about this a lot, because obviously you guys did that Alonso focused podcast, and it's understandable why he's the story. With Stroll, I think, and I'm not certain we're going to see this, but I think what he has to do is show the outside world, but also internally, that you're prepared to get stuck in to being a part of the solution here to all these problems, so that if it comes good and you're still there to reap the benefits when that time arrives, people aren't just saying, oh, you're only there because your dad owns the team and you've got a job for life. You can, if it comes good and you're reaping the rewards, be the guy who can say, I was there in the trenches when it was difficult. I got stuck in. I put in the extra time at the factory. I lived the difficulties of the start of this new era. So I deserve to reap the rewards if and when it comes good. Don't just kind of, you guys know better than most. How many times does somebody in the media, or certainly at the race, come back from a Lance Stroll media session and go, well, that was pointless. He was just miserable. He's grunting. Don't come across like that. I know it's hard. It's not where any F1 driver wants to be. You've got all these expectations. You're entitled to be annoyed about it, but that should be more behind the scenes, and it should be in a productive way. So be annoyed. I'm sure Fernando Alonso is very annoyed as well, but then you have to turn it into, right, how do I turn this annoyance into trying to fix the problem? Because then you can point back to that if it all comes good. And I hope that we just see something. I hope he looks engaged and he comes across engaged, because I get sick of hearing you guys come back and going, well, what a waste of time that was.
I don't see that happening, though, only because he's lived through this period already. 2023, when the car looked good, I know he was injured, but he worked super hard to get back, because he had a sniff of like, oh, this could be really good. And that you saw the best of Lance Stroll in that window before they lost their way kind of mid-season. Ever since then, he has cut that miserable figure of like, oh, I'm not enjoying this is rubbish, the car's not going anywhere, I can't get the results. He's the most car limited or one of the most car limited drivers. You saw it so clearly in Qatar last season when Alonso was wrestling that car into Q3 top 10 and Stroll was nowhere near, and he had no answer for that. But if the car was fundamentally better, I think he would be able to get higher up. So he's stuck in that sense, but also he isn't going to suddenly become this guy that's like, oh, do you know what, I'm going to roll my sleeves up. I don't think he's going to be miserable, because he was banking on this Honda powered Adrian Newey Aston Martin revolution, just pushing them right up to the front. That's the only time he was talking positively, was about that very thing. And now it's looking like it's going to start the absolute opposite of that. I don't see how he, knowing what we know about him and what we've seen of him, I don't see him reconciling that very easily. But
it's the opportunity, as Glenn's laid out. I think he can perhaps reflect on it and think, right, how can I make this into a win for me, even if it's not a literal win? And that is the means to do it. So I think that would be a great story if he can.
He's swept up in the Alonso curse, though, isn't he?
Yeah, well, exactly, yeah.
But there is the issue there that Fernando Alonso in a difficult situation. Fernando Alonso is not an easy teammate to have on the other side of the garage.
Exactly. I mean, it's tough for anybody, but
they're all going to be down, aren't they? That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Like every member of that team is going to be on the floor at the moment because it's just an absolute nightmare start.
Yeah, that's not going to be a quick fix, as we discussed. I think it's going to be really, really tough. And yeah, Cadillac existing is just an extra counterpoint to show how bad it is, because Cadillac should not be beating anyone in their first year. Long term, they've got great potential, but if they can, even if they don't beat Aston Martin, if they don't out-qualify them or out-reliability them, for want of a better word, being close is an extra embarrassment for Aston Martin, because Cadillac doing a glorious world-class job, which they have done in the circumstances. I think it's fantastic what they've done. They shouldn't be able to get close to even an Aston Martin at the bottom of what they should be able to achieve. So, I think it is going to be a tough start. Don't expect anything quick to turn around. But yeah, that's the opportunity for Stroll. Well, thanks, Glenn and Ben. We've been through pretty much every driver ahead of the season. Like I say, we've got part 2 coming up very, very shortly. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.